James, this is a scorched earth approach to re-election in a state he narrowly lost, as Kristen pointed out, in 2016. You were there. What's your assessment of what you saw and heard?
Well, there's a couple of interesting things here. You know, in a lot of states, it's the Republican office holders or the Republican candidates who want to marry themselves to Trump, thinking that may be their best path to victory, at least their best path to the Republican nomination. But, you know, Trump is quite underwater in terms of approval ratings in New Hampshire, and he has been for quite some time. While you understand, while the campaign wants to say this is one state we can flip, it was the narrowest loss that they had in 2016. All the signs point to that will be very difficult. However, it was very important for the state's governor, Chris Sununu, a Republican, to appear alongside Trump. He is much more popular than Trump is in the state. And I think overall, what was really fascinating to me is, you know, this was the first rally that he held after El Paso and after Dayton. And he's been signaling in the wake of that he might be open to, say, background checks or other gun control measures. He wasn't bringing that up last night, but he probably just knew his crowd.
And the president railing against his enemies, real and perceived, is nothing new. But in the New York Times, Maggie Haberman and Peter Baker had this assessment. They wrote, typically rambling, veering on and off script, seemingly at random over an hour and a half. He repeated points he had already made earlier in the evening, as if he did not remember already making them. Eddie, is the pressure getting to him?
Absolutely. Since we're on the verge of the NFL football season, you know, when you have a rookie quarterback and no defensive coordinator knows what they can do, they don't scheme for them. But after they've seen them for a while, they know what they do, they know what their tendencies, and now the rookie quarterback has a high learning curve. Donald Trump, we thought he was a new figure on the field. We didn't know what he was doing politically. Now folk know his game. We know his tendencies. We know his safety. We know his drop-off passes. We know his patterns. And so what he's doing, he's trying to go into his playbook, and it's not working. And so there's a combination of not quite desperation and a combination of crazy, and we saw it clearly, I think, last night in New Hampshire.
And a lack, it seems, of planning, any kind of looking ahead to say, okay, if we get to the point of this economic downturn, what do we do about it? The Washington Post wrote this: officials in the White House, at the Treasury Department, and throughout the administration are planning no new steps to attempt to stave off a recession. Rather, Trump's economic advisors have been delivering the president upbeat assessments in which they argue that the domestic economy is stronger than many forecasters are making it out to be. Is this going to come back and bite the president?
Well,
I gotta have a plan. There are certain eventualities for which you want to have a plan in place.
I have to put everybody in a dark place right now, which is inside the president's brain. And inside his brain, everybody made fun of him when he decided he was going to get into this race. Up until the very last day of the campaign, everybody told him he was going to lose, including the RNC, including most people on his staff, with the exception of one or two Kool-Aid drinkers. And now he's the president of the United States. So if you're somebody like Donald Trump, who got bad news, made fun of, and then you were rewarded, why would you listen to the needle-necked or whatever insult he wants to give them economists who tell him that the economy is turning bad? Why would you believe anything? And so I think that is his mindset. I don't think there is a strategic mindset going forward. It's worked for him to date, and it could create real problems for him and for the country going forward.
You absolutely back up in many ways what the Washington Post reporting has been, and they quote one Republican. This is my favorite quote of the day. He thinks all the people that do this economic forecasting, AB, are a bunch of establishment weenies.
Weenies, not needle necks. That was so close. I hadn't read the article.
Chris, that was the exact quote I was thinking of when Tim was talking that I read yesterday in the Post. It's amazing because it's not only that he should be skeptical of expert information, which he always has been his whole life, but that every piece of information he doesn't like is from an establishment weenie. It's always that they're out to get him. There's a deep state everywhere.
And his gut is better than the facts.
Right. Now, in fairness, I don't think administrations should be speaking about recessions publicly and egging them on. I think that they should be talking optimistically and positively about stability in the economy whenever they can.
But you don't necessarily have to talk about it publicly to plan for the possibility
but that's why,
of a downturn.
in fairness to Larry Kudlow, that's what you do, and you don't. And it is hard for the administration with a mindset like Donald Trump's to try to prepare him. His denial is a dangerous thing. particularly as we talked about yesterday on the trade war. That is really something where he continues to believe. The Washington Post also reported yesterday that Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, begged him not to designate China a currency manipulator, and he did it anyway, and the Treasury had to scramble to make it official policy hours later after it burst out in a tweet. This is the kind of thing where he believed that this was going to be a new weapon in his arsenal. It was going to bring the Chinese to the table, and of course they just continue to, sit him out. So what's problematic is his denial, not about the recession, really about the trade war, which he thinks, continue. He said last night before he left for the rally, I think the longer we stick at it, the worse it is.
That's
for
one
the
area where
Chinese.
Kudlow should know better, by the way.
And James, you make a great point in your Globe article about the rally, which is that last night is an example of the stark advantage that the president has. All he has to do is plan a rally. Huge crowds will show up. He gets a lot of attention. He hammers away at the people and the things that he doesn't like. But you mentioned about how in New Hampshire he's underwater. His assessment of it last night, the only reason he lost New Hampshire in 2016 was because people were coming in from unknown places.
Yeah, then of course, on the way to the rally, he said, but he knew where they were coming from. This is another unfounded conspiracy theory from the president. The state has actually done an exhaustive amount of research on voter fraud, massive voter fraud. They have not found any. They have prosecuted some very small examples. I think we're up to about 4 people. But yes, the president did lose by a very slim margin. He first floated this conspiracy theory just months after the 2016 election. It's been totally unfounded. But it's one of these things that he conjures in his mind about New Hampshire. The other one is that it's a drug-infested den. He was asked about that again last night by a local television news station. He doubled down on it, said, well, that's what people told me. So I don't mean any offense, but I mean, New Hampshire's a drug-infested den. So it's not something you actually hear from a president, much less one wanting to seek their vote.
Yeah, one of the things we played yesterday, and I don't even remember what the reference was, but he said that the percentage was either 50, 60, or 78%. One of those someone had told him, somewhere in there. Anyway, look who was there last night. Corey Lewandowski, of course, the guy. I mean, the president has been very fond of him after getting rid of him. He is reportedly mulling a Senate run in the state, and I want to play what Trump had to say about that last night.
He said, "You're a rhino." I said, "No, sir, I'm not a rhino."
Corey Lewandowski loves your state, loves New Hampshire, and he's tough, and he's smart, and I'm hearing he's thinking about running for the Senate from New Hampshire. I think it'd be tough to beat. I'll tell you one thing, he'll go into Washington, and he's going to have you in mind. He's going to do a job if he does do it. They're all saying, are you going to support him? I said, I don't know if he's running. So, Corey, let us know, please, if you don't mind.
Tim, I mean, look, we're so used to him flouting conventional norms. So one of the norms is you might want to talk to the people in the state, people like the governor, who thinks not only is Corey Lewandowski not a good person to challenge Jeanne Shaheen, but if that he's on the ballot, he could hurt other Republicans who are running for office. Corey Lewandowski?
I'd love to see Corey Lewandowski run for the Senate in New Hampshire, and I think put himself in front of the voters and see how that plays out. I think that would be a very interesting Senate race for him. Look, here's just kind of stepping back a second, Chris, because I'm just struck by this. He spoke for, 90 minutes last night?
He did.
We've gone through now 15 minutes of the show, gone through clips. Did he even talk about El Paso or Dayton? And we are 2 weeks out from an ethnic slaughter in this country of 24 people. I know you were there. And the president doesn't even mention it. The next day, supposedly, he's trying to unite the country around race. There was no uniting happening last night in that speech. And so, if he has an extra 3 minutes out of 90 to speculate about whether Corey Lewandowski runs for a Senate seat, you think that he would be able to talk about some of these, really important issues and really tragic issues that happened.
Well,
and
not only did he not mention El Paso last night, but and James had pointed this out earlier, he stayed away from guns, but also we accidentally played the mayor of El Paso, who we just learned he gave an interview and said that before the president left El Paso, after comforting the victims' families, he insulted him, called him a rhino. And we also heard at the beginning the clip
That's a deep
Eddie.
insult on our side. I don't know if you know that, Eddie. Rhino
A deep
is,
insult,
Rhino's
right?
about as deep as it goes.
He considered it a deep insult.
Right.
And then, some guys protesting gets pulled out, and Donald Trump talks about his weight and says he should go home and exercise. And then in practically the same breath says this is a movement built on love.
First of all, there were young people protesting, and he misidentified, according to Philip Bump in the Washington Post, who was protesting. The overweight guy was actually a Trump supporter. This irony of all ironies. And I think what you've just laid out, Tim, is really clear to me, is that Trump lacks a kind of empathetic and moral capacity. He didn't really care about what happened in El Paso because it's not on his mind now. And to the extent to which his campaign is predicated upon exploiting anxieties and fears and hatreds, it makes sense that El Paso would not come up in New Hampshire. It's not part of his political strategy.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.